This video addresses Chapter 8. This is the second part of Unit 7, and this chapter focuses on a structure called arrays. As I did with the previous chapter, I'm going to focus on the parts that I'm considering important for getting your work done and for moving on to the subsequent chapters. So I'm going to be focusing primarily on the early parts of the chapter, and then talking about the other highlights that are important. So some of this will be detailed and some of it will kind of skip over some things, and I will point those out as we go. These are the larger topics for the chapters, and these are probably the four that we're going to focus on the most, and then we're going to touch upon these other two. All right, now I'm hoping that you remember from your Intro to Programming class or any other languages that you may have taken what an array is. Now, an array is a data structure that allows us to store several components of data collectively under one name and a number of different little containers that go with it. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to pull out my friend here, Excel, and kind of give you an example of what an array looks like and how it behaves. So typically an array will have multiple spots where you can put in data. So for example, I'm just going to type in a few words here. Let's say dog, cat, bird, fish, insects. How about that? I cover all the major pet types, right? Reptiles, maybe. All right. And these are all going to be located inside the same data structure. So like normally if I had a variable, I might call it something like this: animal 1, animal 2, or something to that effect. What an array allows us to do, and I'm hoping you already know this, is to use one name to address all of these collectively. So we can have an array called animal, or maybe animals is better. And then we're going to create what we refer to as index values. And basically what these do is they are identifiers for the various data components inside the array. So animals, in actuality, is the name of the whole structure. So I'm just kind of using colors here to help color code it. So all of these are part of animals. In position 0 of animals, I have dog. In position 1 of animals, I have cat. And so when I start to refer to things in code, and it depends on the language you're using, of course, but usually you'll see something like this. And this is, you should have learned this when you were learning Visual Basic. Right? Does that make sense? All right. And if you're comfortable with that approach and that structure, you'll do just fine. Hopefully this is ringing a bell. If not, then you might want to consider really reading this part of the chapter in detail. You should have covered this stuff in Intro to Programming or in any other language you learned. Usually the syntax between languages is similar, but it can vary, but the concepts are basically the same. Now, one of the real important concepts that goes with this is the fact that whenever you set up an array, the first position in the array, its number begins with 0 and not 1. So this is position 0, but if we were to count how many elements are in here, it's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. The fifth element is in position 4, right? That's the index value for it. So that's one thing to be aware of, and that can kind of mess you up from time to time. So let's put that aside now and keep moving along. So they go through and do some basic explanation here, and I'm not going to reiterate the stuff I just said, but we can often work with arrays in this fashion. So what they're doing here is they're giving you these syntax things. So for example, if you wanted to, it says here, to declare an array of double values to hold sales figures, you might do it in this sort of a fashion. So if it's a double, that's the data type. You call it sales figure. If it's an int, you want to call it ID numbers, you do that. Now notice the square brackets. We're doing a declaration here. We're not assigning any values, but we are indicating that there's an array by virtue of the square brackets. So this is a little different than some languages. Now, guess what? Sometimes you are able to do things a few different ways, and Java is absolutely no exception to this. And let me just show you a few different things that you can do. One, for example, and I'm going to jump down to this particular one. This is what we did on the previous page, right? That is the exact same thing as doing this up to a point. Now, where it becomes different is this 20, because we are creating a new variable, because an array really is a variable. It's a collection of variables, but it all operates under one name. And then we are creating a new double with 20 positions in it. Now, in this next example, and they're saying just as you can do with objects, you can extend that one step further, and you can kind of combine both sides. So I can actually do the declaration almost the same way I would do it with a class, right? Where I say new double, I set up a parameter here for how big it's going to be, and then that's all assigned to sales figure. So from here on forward, sales figure will hold 20 positions, 20 array positions that will go from the number 0 to 19. Okay, so hopefully that makes sense. Now they go through and kind of like what I just did and explain how when you're working with the array, right, animals, position 0 is dog. And that's basically what they're doing here too. They're not showing you what's inside there, but they're showing that sales figure 0, sales figure 1, sales figures 2. And then in my example, it was like animals 0, animals 1, animals 2. All right, so you can see that correlation there. All right, they do usually call that an index. Not usually, they do call that an index. So that's a good thing to know. So if I talk about the index number of the array, that's what it's referring to as that number inside there. All right, so when you get to the point where you actually want to put stuff into the array, you can just do it directly like this. And that's actually what I did here. So if I had an empty position here and I ran this statement, that would put dog in that spot. Okay, so it's saying array or animals position 0, index value 0 is dog, equals dog. All right, so that's one way that you can do it. And if you want to test it, you can do a system out print line, indicate the array position, and it will show. Now it does indicate here that if I did this, it would show the last element in the array of 20. remembering that an array that's got 20 spaces, the last index number is 19. So if I wanted to look at the last position, I would put in 19. If I compare to my own and I wanted to see what's in the last position, even though the array has 5 spots, if I want to see it, I would say system out, print line, animal, square brackets, 4, and that would show me the last position. All right, so hopefully that makes sense to you. All right, so this next little thing here says, just a couple important things in here. It says, when you declare or access an array, you can use any expression to represent the size as long as the expression is an integer. So, in other words, I cannot put 10.5 in here. It's a whole number. But what they're alluding to is the fact that maybe instead of putting in a number or hard coding a number, you might put in a variable of some sort, and that variable has to have an integer value. So if I have a variable called number ELS, that number cannot be a decimal. It cannot be a double. It has to be an integer. So, but you can put variables inside here, and obviously you can't use strings. So that's very important to note, because sometimes you'll do some math and do a determination or figure out the length of your array, maybe subtract a number, and then that gives you a value, and then you can just drop in the variable which pulls in that value automatically, and then it takes you to the right position. So that's something to note that's important. So you do not have to just put numbers in there. You can pull in variables as long as whatever you're pulling in is a whole number, an integer. Similarly, you can also do math inside there, as long as the result is an integer. You can also run a method function, right? Where you go out and it does a bunch of stuff and it returns a value. As long as that value is an integer, you're okay. All right, so for getting a little practice here, we're going to do the first you do it exercise here in Chapter 8. So I'm going to go ahead and start a new file. And it's going to give us some directions here. It says begin class to demonstrate how arrays are used. And they're going to give us the code we need to get started. So I'm just going to copy it. And I'm going to do a little indenting. And then it says on a new line, type in this snippet of code. All right, so keep in mind that this is setting up an array of double. So the data type is double. And then we have salaries, which is going to be the name of it. And I don't know why, but it seems like this copy paste here is dropping in an extra space in every spot. So being as picky as I am here, I go through deleting those. All right, so we declared an array. It's called salaries, and it's got 4 positions. So if I compare to my Excel file, it would have this many spots. 4 positions, 0, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 4. Okay, next little tidbit, drop in these declarations. And now what these will do is basically put a value inside each array position. So position 0 is 6.25, position 1 is 655, etc. All right, so we took all 4 positions and filled them with values. Keep in mind, 4 positions, when you declare it, that's not the index value, that's the number of positions. This is the last index value. So I'm going to keep repeating that until you hopefully understand. And then we're just going to do a little bit of output. And that will wrap it up. Let's put both my curlies right there. Let's go ahead and save it. And I want to go back up to the right folder here. And then I'm just going to go ahead and compile. Good. No errors. Go ahead and run it. And notice we did the output 0, 1, 2, 3. Those are the array positions, and the values correspond to the list. So that worked. So you see that we can assign a value to each individual array position individually. That's one way you can do it. All right, I'm going to jump back over to our textbook now. And what they want us to do is kind of force an error message. So what we're going to do is we're going to actually add this little snippet of code to our program, and we're going to try to output something that isn't there. And kind of, the point of this is really to show you that what's going to happen when the program tries to run and it encounters an error. And this is an error that you might see when you're kind of ignoring the fact that this is not the last array position, but the number of positions. So if I were to change that to a 5, add a 5th declaration here, which happens to have the index value of 4, and I compile and I run, now it works. Okay, but if I get rid of that, it doesn't work. And if you see that message and it says out of bounds, that means there is no array position. I don't know where to put it. I don't know how to get to it. You haven't made it yet. Okay, so that's what that indicates. Okay, the next section here is about initializing an array. And we can do that a number of different ways, and we've kind of already been doing it. The one way is, of course, to just declare the fact that we're going to have an array of integers and give it a name. All right? We're just telling the machine that we're going to create one. No spots of memory have actually been allocated yet. But if we do this, where we not only declare it and give it a name, we say it's a new array of integers that's 10 positions large, meaning the array positions are 0 to 9, that will initialize it. In other words, it will set it up in memory so the spots actually exist. They might be empty right now, but they're there for us to work with. All right. There's another approach that you can use, and I think this is kind of cool. I like this one quite a bit. If you want to create an array, right, so this indicates an array of integers. Here's the name for it. And what if I want to just put stuff in there? So instead of doing this type of thing, right, I say each position separately, I can actually use a declaration like this and fill it. So position 0, position 1, position 2, position 3, position 4, position 5. Now I didn't fill the whole array, but I did fill the first 6 positions, position 0 through 5. 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So hopefully that helps to clarify it. So why don't we go ahead and try this next example. And they want us to take this one and change it to demo array 2. And let's go ahead and save as, add a new file. And now they want us to take this, and what I'm going to do is I'm actually going to paste it in first and talk about what it's doing. Well, first of all, this kind of repeats in very much a different way. So we don't need that declaration because this does the creation of the array. So we have an array of type double. Its name is salaries. And then we're putting these values into the positions. Now notice that I'm not using any index numbers here. I'm not telling it how many array positions there are. I'm just creating it. I'm throwing these things in, and it assumes that you want this, and that's what it does. So I don't need these either, so I can get rid of them. We know there's no position for the fifth item, and I think that's probably all we need to do. Yep, that's all we need to do. So let's go ahead and save it. Compile. Run. And you see we get the same output. So you see that this can be pretty efficient way to declare a list of items. Sometimes if you know what stuff is going in, you have the data all organized. This is not a bad way to do it. So you can just kind of brute force drop it in there. All right. All right, so another thing that we can do is something that they're indicating here, and the reason you're going to want to do this, it'll depend situationally, but it can give you a way to kind of step through an array, I guess is one way to look at it. But here they start by setting up an array, 5 values in it, positions 0 through 4, 5 values. They set up a constant named increase, so that's equal to 3. So they can go through and they can say the score in array position 0, which is 2, we're going to add 3 to it, right? Because plus equals is the same as saying song array is 0 plus 3, and then we put it in here. So this is going to become 5, 17, 38, 70, and 88. Okay, so that's one way to do it. And this is kind of a manual approach. Another way to do it is to do something like this. We still have the 3. We're going to increase it by 3 each time. But we're setting up a for loop. And they use the variable name of sub. So sub will be the subscript or the index value. We're going to start with 0. And it's saying as long as that value is less than 5, and then we will increment 1 each time. So it's going to do the same thing, but since the action is repetitive, it makes sense to put it in a loop. So you can do the same work with 2 lines of code that you just did with 5. All right, so you go through, the first time you go through, this is going to be 0, right? What's in position 0? 2, add 3 to it, so that becomes 5. Then we increase by 1, so then we're in position 1. What's in position 1? 14. Add 3 to it, it becomes 17. So you see how that process works. All right, so that's kind of a handy tool that you'll find. So very often you'll see arrays paired up with loops because it's an easy way to traverse the structure, especially if it's a repeating structure. So that's kind of what they're doing here, and they give you some more examples. And what I'm going to do is move down to this little section, because sometimes you run into the situation where you don't know how long the array is. All right, or you get into a situation where you create a new position in the array, and this is one way to do it. 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, and this is an array of 5. But really the point of it is, how do you know how long the array is? Well, guess what? There's a built-in method. So we can say a statement like this. So if the score array, whatever it happens to be, dot length, it goes through and it figures out how long it is. Now the length of this is 5, all right? So the logic that we used before might not work here, because if I get, actually it still will work, but the length is 5, right? And if you look at what we did here, all right, so you got to be mindful of that. So that's one way to kind of put in a generic structure that will work, because yeah, we do want that sub number to be less than 5. So even though we get to the 5th position, this will be the number 4 and it will work. But sometimes you need to address the position that's in the array, and it's not uncommon to see something to the effect of square array dot length minus 1, so that we get to the right array position, which is one number lower than the length, if that makes sense, I'm hoping. All right, so they move on here to talk about what you can do to actually use components of an array as opposed to using up all the array. So they have a little example here where they loop through some stuff. But what I'm going to do is I'm actually going to move us into the next you do it, which I think will help you to see it. So we're going to do demo array 3 now. So let me go back to our code. Let's call it demo array 3. Do a save as. And then let's see what it says here. It says for int x equals 0, as long as x is less than the length of salaries, I'll put salaries, with the array position being declared by the x. So let me go ahead and replace all this with our little tidbit here. And before I actually delete this stuff, I'm just going to move it down. And then I'm going to paste in the loop. All right, so now what we're seeing is that this little loop here can save us a boatload of time in code, because it is a repeating structure that we see to traverse an array. Now, 4 positions is one thing, but what if you had 40 positions or 400 or 4,000, right? That's where the loop really is powerful, especially when you couple it with a tool like this that allows us to determine the length of the array and then act upon it without even knowing the length of the array, because arrays can change. And that's just going to start at position 0, and every time it goes through the array, it's going to read what's in that position and output it. It's going to increment each time. It's going to keep going until we hit the array length, at which point this statement will no longer be true and it will pop us out. So I'm actually going to get rid of this now. Let's go ahead and just run it, save it, compile, run, and you see we get the same output. Okay, now we're on page 410, and we're going to look at something that's a little new, or I'm hoping is new. Now, we can declare an array, and an array can be filled with numbers that we've demonstrated already. But it's also possible to fill an array with objects. Now, you want to think about really carefully what an object is. You set up a class, which is a blueprint to create a copy of it with its own unique attributes. And therefore, whatever copy is made becomes an object. And then you can take that object, because it's one thing, and then you can place that inside of an array. Now, that's kind of an interesting thought, right? So if you think back, like we made like character. We did that one exercise where we made characters with 2 eyes and 3 noses or whatever it was. And then I can fill an array with character 1, character 2, character 3, character 4, They each have their own name. Each one of those things has all its own attributes. And even though each one of those might have multiple subcomponents, I can refer to it with one array position. So it really kind of unlocks a lot of power. So what they do here is they start talking about this class, and I think we did this a while back, where they create a class called employee, and the employee has an employee number and a salary, all right? And these are the gets and the sets and stuff for this, all right? So here's an example of some ways that you can do this. So for you can set up kind of like you do, let's say if I were to declare multiple integers or strings, right? If I have a class called employee, I can just do one declaration like this. So I could say employee, painter, electrician, plumber. So it sets up 3 different objects based upon employee. Okay, we're not setting any values in or anything like that. But we can also do it in this fashion. Basically the same thing. But the other thing that we can do is set up this structure just like we do with integers and doubles and the like. Because we have this class called employee, we can set up an array of employee. We give that array a name and how many we're going to have. All right. Then they go through and they explain how they're using basically a for loop to go through and populate the array. Now, that particular class, if you look back at the previous page, they have the employee number and the salary. So those are the things that are being built in. So every time we go through the array and we create a new employee, new object, we put in a employee number, and what they're doing is they're starting with the number 101, and every time it goes through they're adding x to it. Now what is x? X is whatever is in position 0. So the first time through we're going to add 0 to 101. So the first one's going to be 101. The pay rate is going to be $6.35. The next time we go through it's going to be 101 plus 1, so it's 102, and the pay rate's $6.35. So you see what it's doing? It goes through, it creates all 7 of the array positions, it puts in a unique employee ID number because it changes 1 each time, and then the same pay rate for everybody. So that's one way to populate the array. Now you can also go through and do something like this, which is almost the same thing. And a couple more examples here. Now once again I'm going to kind of race ahead so I can get to the examples and show you how it works, because I think that's a little bit more effective, at least it is for me. And you can use this in such a number of different ways that's what's really cool about it. Now notice here it says using the enhanced for loop with objects. Now I don't think we talked about this much when we went through loops, because I was just hoping that you guys would get the basics, right? So one thing that we can do, it says for employee worker colon emps. Now this is still a for loop. What do you think that this is going to do? Right, and notice that what it's doing is it's getting from this object called worker, it's getting the employee number, because what worker is, and I don't know if they did this on the previous page, and probably, no they didn't. Okay, so they just jump right into it. And we have a class called employee, we have an instance called worker, and then we have our actual employees. And then for that worker, we get the employee number, we output a space, and then we get their salary. So we're assuming that that stuff is already there, and we're just pulling it out. But it's a much simpler syntax. If it confuses you in any way, go to the long form. But it is kind of a nice little shorthand technique that you might find useful. So, all right. I think they just talked about stuff that we already talked about. So I want to get to this example here. So let's go ahead and make a new file and do this exercise. So I'm going to do file new. And we want to create our public class. Content area there. And we're going to add some variables here. And I want you to note, as we're doing this, I am not creating an executable program here. I am setting up a class that we will use to create objects. Okay, so I got rid of the extra spaces there. So we're creating a private string variable called team name. We're not assigning a value. Then we're creating an array of strings called members with 4 positions, index numbers 0 through 3. The next thing that we're going to do is we're going to do get and set for the team name. So I'm going to paste that in also. Then we're going to go back we're going to do a set member, and I'm not sure if I saw that right. Nope, that's okay. I thought that they had a typo in there, but it was just my eyes with the typo, not the content. Let's get it all in there, and then we can use a little bit of time to go back and just see what it's doing, or at least if we can figure out what it's doing. Okay. All right, so we get the team name, we set the team name. Get the member, we set the member. And then notice here when we do the set member, because we are working with an array, it does work off of an array position. That position, array position, is a number, integer, that is being passed in. All right? And that's all we need to do here. This is going to be saved as bowling team Java. It's already set to be saved, so let's just do a save as. And here we are going back to the wrong folder again. All right, so it's bowling team. It's a bowling team class. The next thing we're going to do is we're going to create the program, and we're going to begin with these opening statements here. So let's create a new Java file. All right, and we're going to call it bowling team demo. Now, I know they probably give us the curly brackets later, but it always makes me a little nervous to not have them in. So I'm putting them in. Then we're going to do some declarations here. So let's paste them in and then we'll talk about them. All right, so we create a new string called name. We create a new bowling team, so based on the class that we just created, and it's called bowl team, and it's a new bowling team. We set up an integer. We set up a constant, number of team members, and then we set up a scanner. Now, of course, if we're going to do a scanner, we have to remember to do what? Import the library that will make it work. And where's my code? So that needs to be placed up here. All right, so we're going to do an input. Then we're going to do a prompt. So we're going to ask for some input from the user, and it says, enter a team name. You'll take that name, put it in the name string variable, and then it's going to run this method from the bowling team class that's set team name. So we run that and it sets the name. And then we're going to set up a loop, and the loop is going to do some things for us that will be quite helpful. I hope you guys will agree. All right, so before we look at this syntax here, I'm actually going to see what it's doing on the inside, and it says, it prompts the user for enter team member's name, grabs it, puts it into name, and then it goes through and it does set member X name. So now usually when we've done these objects based on classes, we just do one thing, it sends in the information, it creates it, and we're all done. Here in this statement, that's kind of what we did. That's how we've normally done it. But now we have inside that class file the ability to work with an array, so we can repeatedly send in that array position, send in the name, and put it in the array. So one by one, we set up a name for the team, right? Because one team has multiple team members. So that's what we're doing here. And we don't know in the offset how many team members there are. Well, we do, there are 4, but this gives us the capability of adjusting this number if we need to. So as long as X, or the index number, is less than 4, we will do this loop until we populate the whole array, so we get 4 people in there. Now what's left to do is we got to do some output. Let's paste that in down here. And part of the way we're doing that is with a loop. And I'm not sure they have this extra one here. I'm sure it's there for a reason. All right. So we're going to output this little bit of text, members of the team, and then we are going to go into our object, run this method, and that will get the team name. Now remember, the team name is just one piece of information. So that'll just come back and say members of team whatever. And then we're going to step through and we're going to go through the array and we're going to get whatever particular member is in that array. So we're going to start at 0, we're going to count up one by one and go through each position until we get to position 3, which is less than 4, right, because number of team members is 4. And we'll grab the member and put it out on the screen. And that's basically all there is to it, unless they add something here. Nope, that's it. Make sure we put in our curlies. Let's go ahead and save this. Is that the right name? Yes, it is. There it is. Saved, and of course now it's like reverting. Some things I don't like about this program is it seems like once you save in a certain folder, it wants to keep you there. All right, so I'm going to save this in my current location. Of course, the problem is if I saved it in a different folder in the class file somewhere else, it's not going to be able to see that other file. Okay, so now that I've saved it, I'm going to go ahead and compile. Hopefully no errors, that's wonderful. And now we're going to run it, so I'm going to pull this back up. Enter a team name. Oh gosh, what's the team name? The Kellys. All right, the Kellys. Shouldn't it be the Kellys, or should it be Kellys? I like that better. So now we're going to enter a team member's name. Well, of course, there's Kelly, and Nancy, and me, and who else are we missing? Dave, the IT guy. Oh, it seems to stop in. George Clooney. I would bet that George Clooney does not bowl. All right. So then this filled our array one by one for the team members. This filled the one piece of information for name, which is the name of the team. And then we did an output. And that's all there is to it. So it's a really kind of a simple little exercise, but it demonstrates a couple of different things that you can use arrays with objects, and it really kind of unlocks a lot of power, especially when you couple it with loops and some other structures. All right, so one of the last things we're going to work on here before we call it for the night is working on the second half of this exercise. And we're going to go right back to the work we were doing. We're going to save it as Team Demo 2, so let's go do that first. Bowling Team Demo 2. We'll do a save as. I'm going to be mindful of my folder, which switched one more time. So be careful if you're getting errors for not finding stuff. Now, you're probably not switching folders like I am because I was looking for different things in different locations, but here we are. I'm just making sure I see my other bowling team stuff here, and there it is. Because that class file, which is this one, that needs to be there for these programs to run. Okay. All right, let's see what the first instruction says here. It says above the declaration of bowling team object, add a new name constant that holds a number of bowling teams. And then replace the statement that declares a single bowling team object with an array declaration for bowling team object. So that we are going to do this, and then we're going to jump over to our code. And that is going to go here. All right. So we still have a string called name, but now we are saying that there's a certain number of teams, and we have a new array of teams. And now if you think about this conceptually, what it's doing is it's setting up a different type of array. So we have the one array that's inside this class, right? And that would be the team members. So each team's got 4 members, right? But each team only has one name. What we're doing in this program is we're setting up an array that contains a number of teams. So we have full-blown objects now inside the array position, and then each one of those objects is going to have its own array. All right, so don't let it confuse you. It's actually not that weird. Now we're going to add another integer here for counting, and that's going to be y. I could declare them both together, but that's just as simple to do. Now let's move on. All right, so let's see where they want us to put this. It says Following the declaration of the scanner object before the team name prompt, insert a for loop that executes a certain number of times. So we are going to drop that. We're going to copy it. And they want us to put it where again? Before the team name prompt. So that would be here. All right. All right, so then this is going to look at the number of teams now. So we're going to loop through for each number of teams, and we're going to create a new bowling team every time we loop through. And then every time we do that, we also need to set the team name. So we're not going to set it once, we're going to set it once for each time we go through. So it says delete the statement that uses the set name method with a single bowl team object. In its place, insert a statement that uses the method of one of the array elements. All right, so somewhere here is a set team. Where is it? Why am I not seeing it? Right there. And you know what I'm going to do here is I'm going to take the scanner, I'm going to cut it, and I'm going to put it up here before the for loop because it doesn't really need to be redeclared each time. I mean, once we have it set, it's set. And we're going to set up our for loop, and then inside that for loop is where we're going to do this stuff. So we're going to prompt for a name. We're going to grab the name, we're going to put it into position Y. I'm hoping this makes sense to you. And then it says within the first for loop controlled by X, delete the statement that uses the set member. In its place, insert this. Once again, for the same reason. Because really what we're doing at this point is we are running an array inside of an array. And just so if it's helpful at all, maybe a good thing to do is to comment that out. And maybe I should have done that with the previous too. So we're not setting the members for just the one bowl team. We're setting it for whatever team is in position Y, because we're going to have an array of teams, and then each team has an array of names or array of members. And really, from a conceptual standpoint, this loop, this whole loop structure, is inside the other loop. So we loop through all the teams, and then for each team that we're looping through, we also loop through all the members. All right, and here they give us, well, thank you very much. Why don't you just give it to us all at the same time? So what they did is they gave us the completed code here. So if you want, at this point, you could just copy all this and make sure it's all correct. And what they're doing, you know, is just making sure we're not screwing it up, in essence. So I know mine's okay because I never make any mistakes. And then we're also going to need to change the output at the end of the program so that it loops through correctly, given the fact that we have multiple teams to go through. So we're actually going to replace all of this. Separate for loop now with another for loop inside of it. I know, isn't that crazy? Just a for loop inside of a for loop inside of a for loop. Oops. And apparently we don't need this one. Okay. So for the same reason we have a for loop inside of a for loop here above, is the same reason we have it for the output. So, and that, the reason it has to be that way is, remember, we have an array of teams. Each team has an array of members. Okay, so I don't think there's any more instructions. I could be wrong. All right, so there's not. So I'm going to click my save button here. I'm going to do my compile. Oh, one error. Let's see. Bowling team, error reached at the end of the file while parsing. Oh, what does that say? I think we have one extra curly bracket. Maybe not. Maybe one curly bracket not enough. Is that what I'm thinking here? So let's compile. Good, that was what it was. So what happens, you do all this copy, paste, replace. Enter a team name, Dragons, and you can go ahead and just type in some nonsense just to get some text in there. All right, so we're getting an exception here. All right, so we have some sort of a problem at line 30. Unfortunately, folks, the next class is starting here in less than a minute, so I'm going to have to cap it. If I figure out a fix for this, I'll post it in a video that runs directly after it. We'll see you next week.